West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
We're back with the politics lead and a face-off between the Georgia GOP and Georgia-based businesses over the new, generally more restrictive voting law in the state. Major League Baseball moved its All-Star game out of Atlanta to protest the law, and the CEOs of Atlanta-based Delta and Coca-Cola both blasted the new legislation. The law gives voters less time to request absentee ballots, imposes a new voter ID requirement, and bans officials from sending absentee ballot applications to all voters. For in-person voting, the law makes it illegal for non-election workers to hand out food or water to voters within 150 feet of a polling place. It also bans mobile voting sites unless the governor declares an emergency. Now, there are some other ways in which the law does allow expanded early voting. But let's talk about it all with Georgia's Secretary of State, Republican Brad Raffensperger. Secretary Raffensperger, good to see you. Republicans say that this law is necessary to boost election integrity. But as we saw in November's presidential election in Georgia, you had record turnout. You and the governor and the lieutenant governor said repeatedly there was no evidence of widespread voter fraud that would have changed the election in any way. Why did the election laws need to be changed? It seemed like your elections and the runoffs in January were a huge success.
Going back in history, in 2018, Stacey Abrams never conceded defeat, and we had the same thing happen in 2020, this time on the Republican side. And in both cases, the elections were run fairly, honestly, and accurately, but there was a shot to the confidence of voters in the accuracy. And so one side, the left, was, saying that wasn't a fair fight. And then in 2020, then the Republicans were saying the same thing. So now we really needed to address confidence-building measures. And I looked at the bill. There's many good things in the bill. And I've also heard your beginning. And you make viewpoints from the other side of the aisle. But at the end of the day, it has never been easier to vote in the state of Georgia, and we still have accessibility. We also have balanced that out with security.
I know that you have issues with Stacey Abrams and what she said after she lost the gubernatorial race in 2018. But let's be clear here. This law is happening because of the big lie spread by former President Trump, his enablers in Congress, MAGA media, all of this stuff that this election was stolen from him. It resulted in that horrific attack on the Capitol on January 6th. The election was not stolen from him. You've affirmed this many times as well, received threats because of your integrity on this issue. Why are you willing to go along in any way with this law? Does that not lend credence to the fact that to this big lie?
Well, there are some very good measures in the bill. One of those is that we've been sued both by the Democrats and the Republicans on signature match. And so we've taken that off the table, and now you use a very objective measure of driver's license number and birthday, day, month, and year. It's virtually the same process as they're using currently in Minnesota. So it's really something that's used in both red states and blue states. It's good policy, and I support that measure.
I want to ask you, after the CEO of Delta criticized the law, the Georgia House of Representatives voted to strip Delta of a tax break worth about $35 million, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Now, the Senate didn't vote on it, so basically the measure died. But you're a Republican official. Should elected officials in your state be using their governmental power to punish corporations if CEOs criticize laws they don't like?
Georgia's had a long history of encouraging businesses to move here, to expand here, and my method would be really to reach out and have conversations with CEOs. I'm very grateful that Delta, is here. I'm grateful that we have UPS, Home Depot, a lot of great corporations, Coca-Cola, because they're creating jobs for Georgians, and also they're the international headquarters. And so I'd really like to have more conversations, really explain the bills, and where there are issues of concern, sit down with them and just sit down and reason with them. But we've expanded early voting. We've gone from a minimum of now 16 days up to 17 days plus 2 on Sunday. So that's not been hurt at all. We've also made sure that the counties are going to shorten lines. We'll have a maximum of 1 hour wait time. In the November election, after we worked with the counties and gave them some objective measures and objective criteria, we had an average of 2-minute wait time on Tuesday afternoon on Election Day. That's the type of performance we need to see in all 159 counties.
But with respect, don't you think it's an abuse of power for the Georgia legislature to strip Delta of a tax break because they don't like the CEO criticizing them? I mean, that is just, I can't imagine, just if that became the standard in this country, legislators saying, oh, you're going to criticize my bill, well, therefore I'm going to do this from my position of power because I don't like your criticism. I mean, that's hideous.
Georgia's motto is wisdom, justice, moderation. And I believe that calm voices, calm conversations are much better. And I think since the November election, I've shown that I can stand in the gap, I can take the flack, but also I can still respond, appropriately, but also with sound judgment and really with the facts. And at the end of the day, I think that is much more helpful for Georgia.
This law also targets you. It undermines your power as Secretary of State. You are no longer the chair of the Elections Board. Instead, it's going to be an individual that the legislature appoints to that position. So now the State Election Board has the power, in addition, to suspend county election officials. I have to say, this part of it seems like it was designed to avoid what happened last time when you demonstrated integrity. You refused to undermine the election, even though you were being pressured by Donald Trump and Republican officials. This seems like setting the stage for an unelected bureaucrat to help corrupt politicians undermine an election in 2022 or 2024.
Well, that is obviously one piece of legislation. I believe it's bad policy. At the end of the day, we need to be able to hold counties, accountable. But the challenge is when you have an unelected chairman of the state election board, who's going to hold them accountable? They don't report to the voters. So what I do as the chair, as the state election board, or as Secretary of State, I'm held accountable to the voters. I've stated my point. I don't support that piece of legislation. Speaker has actually stated his. He wanted to use that as retribution for me mailing out to all registered active voters absentee ballot applications when we were in the middle of a pandemic. I think I did the right thing, and I do it again.
Don't you think that your party is confronting a situation where instead of trying to appeal to a more diverse America that is happening all over the country, but certainly in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, instead of trying to appeal to those voters, and by the way, Donald Trump showed that he did have an ability to increase his vote with black voters and Latino voters and other groups. Instead of doing that, they're trying to make it harder for those people to vote? I mean, isn't that really what's going on?
But when we make any movement on election bills, we need to make sure we touch all the corners, all the stakeholders. That's why when we had House Bill 316 2 years ago, I reached out to the King Center, talked to Bernice King, let her know what we're doing, had her actually test the machines, in a private testing in our office, Secretary of State's office. But then we took those machines at the King Center. She was very gracious to us. But I wanted to make sure we had rapport with our key stakeholders. We have a legacy in Georgia that isn't very bright at times, and we need to be very mindful of that sometimes what we say carries great consequence, and they may read into it things that we didn't mean. And therefore, I've tried to be very cautious and very mindful of my speech, very respectful of people that have done a lot more long before I was here in Georgia.
Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
It is Tuesday, the 6th of April of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We put a small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika upon our chowder, which also contains roasted corn. That's the way we do it, so beware. And since you be here, why don't we get on with it? Hey, how are you? Well, we have an infrastructure bill that will be obstructed because I guess it's some sort of commie plot to make America great again. How dare we? Yeah, you got to understand. The reason we haven't had any infrastructure spending for decades because of Republican intransience is because, I've always maintained that there's something untoward about what they're doing. It's almost like they're trying to destroy things. It sure does seem like it. And they were supposed to be the party of responsibility. I think they have responsibility to something other than America. Because if you're attempting to deconstruct the administrative state so it can be shrunk to the size where it can be thrown out of a 5-story window by Vladimir Putin, I got to tell you, even though he's supposedly a judo master, he's not that big of a guy. Ooh. And so for him to be able to throw, our government out of a 5-story window, it has to be shrunk down pretty damn small. And one way to do that is not to repair anything. And then to maintain that only roads and bridges are infrastructure, pipes in the ground, how dare you say that's infrastructure, commie? You're just trying to get some sort of money boondoggle out of this. They always think like what they do. They always think of what would I do if I was in a similar situation? And what they would do is the worst. They would steal, they would kill, they would cheat. So then they presume everybody does that. And anybody who's actually a do-gooder is looked at with the most obscene disdain. There must really be something wrong with that guy. And so they attempt to find some little chink in the armor. Oh, look, Al Franken was joking about playing with some starlet's breasts on a USO flight. And way before he was a politician, when he was still a comedian, he was a funny guy. Look at that. Get him out of there. He's a perv. And then you got Matt Getz. Okay, well, they protect their own. We hold ours to account. No matter how minor their transgressions may be. I'm serious. Oh, you said that you were a vegan? Well, I gotta tell you, it's vegan. And so you can't be part of our party. And sometimes people fall for it. Anyway, our party is actually quite the big tent. I always maintain that if there was no Republican Party, we wouldn't have to worry about a one-party system because then we'd become a parliament. It's the only way we'd be able to get anything done, factions, and within our own party. Exactly what the founders tried to avoid. Yeah, and here we are. So, Mitch McConnell wants to use some bills of attainder, huh? I thought that was not allowed. Mitch? Oh, that's right. You preside over the graveyard where democracy goes to die, Mr. Grim Reaper. Well, he's now threatening corporate America for apparently, I don't know, following their Citizens United mandate. I guess Citizens United only meant that they could spend unlimited money on Republican policies and candidates, like selling out America to Vlad. But if they're spending their unlimited monies on representative democracy, well, that's a line too far. And Mitch will not stand for it. And he's laying a line in the sand. All right, here's this bill of attainder. What? I don't know. I guess because no one knows what the Constitution of the United States says outside of the Second Amendment. And maybe parts of the First that they confuse with the Bill of Rights. But I'm just saying. Oh, man. So we can't even talk about Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists. I know I harp on that a lot, but it's a seminal document in American history. In constitutional history, for that matter. Come on. We should all be conversant in Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists. You can start by Googling it. Now, remember, when we were all kids, and I know because the demographic for our show here is of a certain age now. We've all become of a certain age. How'd that happen? Anyway, we were taught as kids that you didn't go to the encyclopedia as the end-all. That was where you started. It was only a reference source so that you would go to the sources. So when you Google, remember, it's only the Reader's Digest thumbnail sketch of it, and you'd be, well, at best, the encyclopedia, okay? So to really understand, you need to really delve into the history and the source material, and maybe read a few letters that were, mailed about during the day, like Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists, in which a separation of church and state was pretty much established or explained by a founding father. So if people knew a little bit more, and when I say people, I mean maggots, like the half, maybe we can't expect to convince the half that believes that the insurrection on January 6th was peaceful and the only violence was by Antifa. Half of the Republican Party believes that. So maybe they're not, we can't save them. But if we were to explain a bit about the Constitution beyond parts of the First Amendment that they confuse with the Bill of Rights, and they know the Second Amendment except for the part about a well-regulated militia, they think a well-regulated militia is one that, owns some property in Idaho so they can practice killing people. That's well-regulated. And they do. So if we were able to explain to them that what this is that's going on with Mitch McConnell and corporate America, I think a bill of attainder might still be beyond their intellectual grasp. Boy, are we in deep doo-doo. Can't teach them. We can try to force them, but then they'll take over wildlife refuges in the Cascades. Oh, did you hear that idiot Bundy and his followers, there's about 1,500 of them surrounded the judge's house, who is deciding upon, Bundy violating the law in Idaho. My God, these people. See, we say ballots over bullets, and they go, we're going to show you how it works. I still maintain that, you don't really go up against the might of the American government. And I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to draw him in. What did the American government do in the desert with his dad? Nothing. What did they do essentially up in Malheur? So a guy got killed by, state cops. They're not afraid of the American government. What do? We let them do what they want to do. Burn down a forest to cover up your poaching of a bunch of deer? No problem. That's their property rights as Americans. It wasn't even their property. Okay. I guess they want the Wild West with all of the lawlessness involved. No. I like my civilization, and I expect to continue living in it. Okay? What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Speaking of the loss of civilization, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, he was trying to explain why he supports the state voting bill that strips his power, by the way, after he said there was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election. Well, he said there was a lot of good things in there, too. Oh, yeah. Waiting times are going to be decreased. For who? White people? He said, yeah, we're mandating not more than an hour wait in line. Yeah. In white districts, give me a break. They closed down polling places. You can't drop off a mail-in ballot. This is the other thing. He was harping on, the voting machines that we showed one of the King children, Martin Luther King's kids. We showed her the voting machine, showed her how good it is. Well, you know what can't be hacked, and that is a mail-in ballot. Would you shut up? Jesus. I said all along, Brad Raffensperger was on Kemp's side against Stacey Abrams back when Stacey Abrams had the election stolen from her, from the guy, Kemp, who was then Secretary of State and running the elections, also held up just enough ballots, and they were Stacey Abrams ballots, coincidentally, held them up just long enough for him to win. And that is what Donald Trump wanted for his election. And he didn't get it. Raffensperger is now suffering for it. But like a good old boy, because there's always a future in the good old boy network, he's making sure that, I'm still a good old boy. On the rest of the menu, the National Labor Relations Board found that 2 outspoken Amazon workers were illegally fired last year. Businesses want masks on even as states drop the mandates. And Mitch McConnell is warning corporate America to stay out of politics now that corporate America is siding with representative democracy. I gave you a little bit of taste, didn't I? After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Putin signed a law that will keep him in power until 2036. Then he'll change that law, too. And the World Health Organization won a dismissal of a lawsuit in New York over its pandemic response. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, off to the right of the page is our chat room link. And the chat room link is right there by the social media scroll. Also, as you probably know, the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. If you would then look across the page to the left, hopefully you'll find our Patreon link there at netrootsradio.com. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring patronage helps us pay our bills, and then we can fly under the radar and continue what we have been doing for the last 10 years. And what has that been? Well, we're now celebrating our 10th anniversary. Happy birthday to us. For that continuous 24/7, 365 resistance radio that we've all come to expect, because there are forces marshaled against representative democracy. And, it is our civic duty to, muster ourselves against it now, shouldn't we? And you have allowed us to do so, fulfilling our civic duty by, How has it been done? If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, and send those funds to us, we are able to put those monies into a kitty with our own monies, and we pay our bills. We fly under that radar, and we continue what the founders originally intended so long ago. Thank you for your generosity. And also another shout out to those who increased their generosity. Because the bills go up, even in times of calamity. How dare they? But thank you for your generosity, all kidding aside. It has come at a, well, shall we say, a needed time. Indeed. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and he takes care of graphics, and he does voiceovers, and he does interstitials, and he does so much more along with Kelly. Thank you all. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, of course. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. If you don't find it there, I post it up on Twitter and other social media platforms because that's what you do. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And do please, all kidding aside again, pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, wherever podcasts can be found. And I don't know, review them. I think that's how you get the W's up into the search engine towards the top, where they have the quadruple A's. Yeah, okay. Well, I still like West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It was a little cafe I had, and a catering outfit too. All right, enough of that. Let's get into this first offering here out of the Associated Press. And you do know we're in the Bistro Cafe part of this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And it is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Roasted corn in the chowders. That's how we do it. Out of the Associated Press by Joseph Pisani. The National Labor Relations Board has found that 2 outspoken Amazon workers were illegally fired last year. Both employees, Emily Cunningham and Marin Costa, worked at Amazon offices in Seattle and publicly criticized the company, pushing it to do more to reduce its impact on climate change and to better protect warehouse workers from the coronavirus. And that was way before we found out Amazon drivers had to pee in a jar, not for a test, but just to keep working so they didn't have to go actually to a bathroom. Cunningham shared with the AP an email from the NLRB, which said it found that Amazon violated the rights of the 2 workers. The government agency also confirmed that it found merit in the case, adding that if Amazon doesn't settle the case, a complaint will be filed. After that, a trial could start. The news was first reported by the New York Times. Does Barry Weiss know? In a statement, Amazon said it disagreed with the preliminary findings because that's what they always do, and said it fired the employees for repeatedly violating internal policies, not because they talked publicly about working conditions or sustainability. I would presume that internal policies means that you don't publicly speak about working conditions or sustainability. Let's be clear. Of course, then they mealy-mouthed said in the statement, "We support every employee's right to criticize their employer's working conditions, but that does not come with blanket immunity against our internal policies, all of which are lawful," the Seattle-based company said. Cunningham said the ruling proves that they were on the right side of history. Amazon tried to silence us, said Cunningham, and it did not work. Because of the ruling, Amazon could be forced to offer Cunningham and Costa their jobs back, pay them back pay, and reimburse them for expenses related to losing their jobs. Cunningham and Costa, who were user experience designers at Amazon, were the 2 most prominent voices among a group of workers who wanted the company, which has a giant carbon footprint, to take more steps to combat climate change and to stop doing business with oil and gas companies. They held protests and spoke to the media about their concerns. About a year ago, Cunningham and Costa plan to call between Amazon warehouse and office workers to talk about unsafe conditions in the e-commerce giant's warehouses. Before it could happen, Amazon fired both women. An Amazon executive quit in protest, saying he could not stand by as whistleblowers were silenced. Amazon's treatment of workers has been in the spotlight recently. Votes are currently being counted to determine whether workers at an Alabama warehouse want to join a union. Organizers there want Amazon to pay workers more, give them more break time, and be treated with respect, like not having to pee in a jar instead of actually going to the bathroom. Last year, Amazon also fired Christian Smalls, who led a walkout at a New York warehouse hoping to get the company to better protect workers against the coronavirus. Amazon said it fired him for breaking social distancing rules. The New York Attorney General, which is suing Amazon for not protecting workers enough during the pandemic, alleges in her lawsuit that the firing was meant to silence other workers from making health and safety complaints. Joyce M. Rosenberg of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Several weeks have passed since Texas ended its COVID-19 mask mandate, but if you want to pick up a snack at Soul Pop Gourmet Popcorn in Austin's Barton Creek Square Mall, you'll be turned away if you aren't wearing a face covering. We cannot afford to take chances with the lives of my staffers. They're young people, and their parents have entrusted me with their care, says owner DJ Lozada. She's also concerned about her 85-year-old father, who will soon return to his part-time job in the store. 18 states currently have no mask requirements, including some that have never made face coverings mandatory. Texas Governor Greg Abbott lifted the state's mask mandate on March 2nd, and Indiana expects to end its mandate today, Tuesday. But many business owners like Lozada are keeping their own rules in place, requiring staffers and customers alike to wear masks for the sake of protecting everybody, particularly their employees. And the law is on the owner's side. A company's premises are private property, so owners can insist that customers wear masks, just as restaurants can require that diners wear shoes and shirts in order to be served, says Michael Jones, an attorney with the law firm Eckert Siemens in Philadelphia. Store owners, business owners have the absolute right to require customers, vendors, anyone who comes onto their property to wear a mask. It's legal as long as owners don't enforce their requirements in a discriminatory way, he says. If a customer enters a store without a mask, is asked to leave and doesn't, that could be trespassing under the law. Lozada says she would call 911 if faced with that situation. Most retail chains require employees and customers to wear masks. One exception, Foot Locker, says each store is following the requirements of the state where it's located. Well, that's so leadership quality there, Foot Locker. Guess I'm not buying any shoes from you. Employers have an obligation under federal law and some state laws to provide a safe workplace for their employees. And that can include requiring everyone on the premises to wear masks. In the COVID-19 section of its website, OSHA notes that employers are required to have a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. I sure don't want a hot vat of molten lava falling on me. No one wants that. When employees at Interplast Group question why they have to wear masks, managers at the plastic products manufacturer can point to the law. Also, if you're working in a plastics firm, wouldn't you want to wear a mask? I've been around those noxious fumes, and you have to wear a mask, otherwise you die. A lot quicker than from the COVID, but you still die. Brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. U.S. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell lashed out at corporate America, warning CEOs to stay out of the debate over a new voting law in Georgia that has been criticized as restricting votes among minorities and the poor, and that's just for the start. In a sign of a growing rift in the decades-old alliance between the Conservative Party and U.S. corporations, McConnell said, "My advice to corporate CEOs of America is to stay out of politics. Don't pick sides in these big fights." Meaning, don't pick the other side. You've been on our side. What are you doing? If we move to fascism, you move to fascism too. That's how fascism works. McConnell warned companies there could be risks for turning on the party, but he did not elaborate. Oh, you're going to have a night of the long knives on corporate America? We'll see about that, Mitch. Corporations will invite serious consequences if they become a vehicle for far-left mobs to hijack our country from outside the constitutional order, McConnell told a news conference in his home state of Kentucky. Mitch, sounds to me like the Deripaska money has dried up. Big business ties with Republicans began fraying under former President Donald Trump's leadership, and the party's focus on voting restrictions has soured businesses, embracing diversity as key to their workforce and customer base. Major Georgia employers Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines have spoken out against the law signed by Kemp, and Major League Baseball pulled the 2021 All-Star Game out of the state over the law. So that was strengthening identification requirements for absentee ballots and making it a crime to offer food or water to voters waiting in line. Trump spent months after losing his re-election bid falsely claiming that his defeat was the result of widespread fraud. He failed in dozens of legal challenges. Nonetheless, lawmakers in 47 states have introduced this year alone 361 bills imposing new restrictions on voting. And the Georgia law brought a backlash from some U.S. companies with strong ties to the state. Independent reviews have repeatedly shown that voter fraud is rare in the U.S., and state and federal probes found no evidence of widespread fraud in the 2020 election. Corporate America has long thrown its political muscle behind Republican candidates and office holders, often funneling more campaign contributions to conservative candidates than Democratic ones. And Mitch McConnell, now that Deripaska money has left the country, needs that money from corporate America, but they better toe the line on the policies that he wants. Well, let's go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up on the stories that we have been curating for you today. You're listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Boston and New York are famed for their rivalries. Everything from the Yankees versus the Red Sox to who makes the correct clam chowder. It seems even the local wildlife has hometown pride, because pigeons that roost near Rockefeller Center are genetically distinct from those that summer at the Cape. The finding is in the journal Evolutionary Applications.
I don't think we could be in a city without thinking about pigeons. And for many people, it's one of the few daily interactions that they have with wildlife.
Elizabeth Carlin, a graduate student at Fordham University in the Bronx. As an evolutionary biologist, Carlin was curious about whether pigeons in one city are closely related, genetically speaking, to those from cities nearby. So she did a research-inspired road trip, making stops from Boston to D.C.
I would drive to a city and then start talking to people at Starbucks. Anybody that I could chat with, I would start asking them questions about where they saw pigeons and kind of start to gather intel that way.
Once she'd found a flock, she'd lay down some birdseed.
And then use a net gun, which is basically something that looks like a big flashlight. And it shoots a net out over the pigeons.
With birds literally in hand, she would take a DNA sample.
I like to call it like a pigeon 23andMe, right? We're looking for ancestry and proportion of shared ancestry. And so we can build this big map with all these individuals that kind of tells us who's more closely related to who.
Carlin was surprised to find that pigeons in the Northeast can be divided into two distinct populations.
One population is in Boston and Providence, and then the other population ranges from New York down to Washington, D.C. I had actually, based on previous research, thought that pigeons in each city would form their own separate populations, because if you have food and you have mates, why would you go anywhere? Why would you disperse? And what I'm starting to realize is that pigeons actually kind of view this northeastern megacity as one giant city, at least from Boston down to Washington, D.C.
And it wouldn't take much to promote avian intermixing within this megacity.
One pigeon will leave New York and go down to Philly, and then maybe a pigeon from Baltimore will come up to Philly, and that's allowing there to be gene flow between all these different cities.
Maybe the feathered foragers are simply following the food. Just think of all the French fries left behind at rest stops along I-95.
If humans are traveling this corridor quite a bit, it makes sense that pigeons also are traveling it.
As to why pigeons don't bother making the trip between Boston and New York, Carlin points to the more manicured lawns of Connecticut.
Connecticut is a lot more suburban than these other areas, and that might be why pigeons in Providence and Boston are kind of falling out as separate from pigeons in more southern cities.
Next up, Carlin says she'd like to further explore the relationships that exist within flocks.
Are they aunts and uncles and cousins and parents and grandparents? Or are they just a random group of individuals that happen to come together?
Hopefully, not in the middle of the road. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Heart disease and stroke can be catastrophic. They're leading causes of death, disability, and healthcare spending in the U.S., yet they're largely preventable. Alarmingly, heart disease and stroke are taking a toll on middle-aged adults 35 to 64, with over 800,000 deaths and hospitalizations in 2016. Million Hearts is a national initiative focused on preventing 1 million heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiovascular events by 2022. Coordinated actions by Million Hearts partners in communities, healthcare, and public health will keep people healthy, optimize care, and improve outcomes in populations at risk. Everyone has a part to play. Focus on the ABCs of heart health. A. aspirin use when appropriate. B, blood pressure control. C, cholesterol management. And S, smoking cessation. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs. For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Could giving food or water to a 92-year-old standing in a line for hours under the hot sun waiting to vote be a crime? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. And yes, in Georgia, offering food or water to anyone on a line to vote is a crime, thanks to a new just-passed 95-page voter suppression law, which establishes new rigid voter identification requirements for absentee ballots, a requirement that will prevent many people who need to vote absentee or by mail from voting at all, and will dramatically reduce the number of drop boxes. For example, in a majority-minority district on the outskirts of Atlanta, from 33 to 9. The most outrageous part, there is no basis for any of this. In 2020, Georgia held a completely full and fair, safe and secure election. The votes were counted and recounted and recounted, twice by hand, and the totals were the same every time. But the results were unacceptable to those in power, so rather than trying to change minds, they're changing the rules. And not only in Georgia, frighteningly, in many other states, too. There's an urgent need to pass federal legislation to restore and protect voting rights. The For the People Act, which has passed the House of Representatives, would do that, but the bill faces a filibuster in the Senate. Overcoming the filibuster threat and passing voter protection legislation is critical. The future of democracy, or not, hangs in the balance. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
With chaos in Washington, worsening climate disasters, more wars than we can count, and a wobbling economy here at home, the last thing we need is another big challenge. But look out, here comes a doozy. It's AI, artificial intelligence, the fast-evolving science of autonomous machines that can think, learn, and even reproduce themselves. Consider self-driving vehicles. Once the stuff of science fiction, the future is suddenly upon us, with Google, Daimler, and GM rolling out driverless taxis, commercial trucks, and even cars with no steering wheel or gas and brake pedals. An army of corporate lobbyists is rushing to legislative halls, literally changing the rules of the road to allow full deployment of these vehicles. What about the hundreds of thousands of professional drivers who will lose their jobs? Not our problem, say the financiers and AI barons who will profit from a mass botmobile conversion. Besides, as one AI champion coldly asserts, those drivers get sick, take vacations, etc. People are messy, he notes. Machines are straightforward. Indeed, so straightforward that these 2-ton, non-sentient drivers will be driving straight at a world of defenseless pedestrians. Already, one of Uber's experimental cars killed an Arizona pedestrian last year. We can fix that, says Andrew Ng, a prominent AI investor. They just have to be reprogrammed. By they, Ng doesn't mean the self-driving machines. He means we pedestrians must be reprogrammed. Please be lawful, he scolds, and please be considerate of the computer-driven vehicles. No jaywalking, obey pedestrian signs, give right-of-way to the new technology. This is Jim Hightower saying, so don't just prepare yourself for a brave new world of automation. Prepare to be re-educated so you can interact properly with machines and don't get in their way.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day trade union leader and suffragist Rose Schneiderman was born. She arrived from Poland and settled in New York City with her family as a child. Her father died soon after, and Rose entered the workforce at the age of 13. She sewed caps and organized with the United Cloth and Cap Makers. Rose became a chief organizer with the New York Women's Trade Union League and played a prominent role in the 1909 uprising of the 20,000. While touring Ohio to rally support for women's suffrage in 1912, Schneiderman said, "What the women who labor wants is the right to live, not simply exist. The right to life as the rich woman has the right to life, and the sun and music and art. You have nothing that the humblest worker has not a right to have also. The worker must have bread, but she must have roses too." She grew frustrated with the privileged middle-class women of the New York Women's Trade Union League and began organizing with the ILGWU. But she soon quit, aggravated by the leadership's indifference towards organizing women workers. Schneiderman devoted her energies to women's suffrage. She would soon return to the Women's Trade Union League. By 1926, she served as its national president and became close friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. President Franklin Roosevelt appointed her to the National Advisory Board, where she wrote NRA codes for industries with women workers. Labor historian Annalise Orleck noted Schneiderman attacked sexual segregation in the workplace, tried to unionize women, called for state regulations of working conditions. She argued for comparable worth laws, government-funded childcare, and maternity insurance. Those ideas and dreams are the legacy of Rose Schneiderman. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 34 degrees Fahrenheit. We remain under an active freeze warning for the area, and there is some crispy white stuff upon people's roofs, whose roofs are well insulated, by the way. And looks like we'll be a little bit warmer today, and we will have warm days for the next several days with those damn chilly nights down into the 30s. What the hell is going on? Sounds like spring. Yes, we will be having a high today of about 74 to 75. And quite sunny throughout the day, winds light and variable. Clear skies tonight with lows in the mid to upper 40s, they say. Winds will be light and variable. And then highs tomorrow in the low 70s, sunny skies. Winds light and variable, except they will be changing out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour about noon tomorrow. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon have now been updated from the weekend, and the totals now. We have a spike in confirmed cases. We are now 9,400, and we've added 2 more deaths at 123. So those are, 2-day totals, and they don't look good. Keep wearing a mask. Grass pollen is rated as moderate right outside the window here in Rogue River proper, and I think it's been that way for a few days, even when they were saying it was none. The air quality index, though, is good at 27 parts per million, though that daytime UV index has gone up into the high range at 6. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.12 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles. And relative humidity is at 88%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowdsources from around the world. London is 45 and partly cloudy. Paris is 44 with a rain shower. Rome is 63 and fair. Kyiv is 53 and fair. Kabul is 53 and fair as well. Hong Kong is 70 degrees, and they say they are fair. Tokyo is 51 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 70 and fair. San Francisco, California is 48 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 57 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Vladimir Ischanov of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a law allowing him to potentially hold onto power until 2036, a move that formalizes constitutional changes endorsed in a vote last year, changes that Vladimir Putin put in, by the way. The July 1 constitutional vote included a provision that reset Putin's previous term limits, allowing him to run for president 2 more times. The change was rubber-stamped by the Kremlin-controlled legislature, and the relevant law signed by Putin was posted yesterday, Monday, on an official portal of legal information. The 68-year-old Russian president, who has been in power for more than 2 decades, longer than any other Kremlin leader since dictator Joseph Stalin, said he would decide later whether to run again in 2024 when his current 6-year term ends. He has argued that resetting the term count was necessary to keep his lieutenants focused on their work instead of darting their eyes in search for possible successors. The constitutional amendments also emphasize the primacy of Russian law over international norms.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Jonathan Stemple of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A U.S. judge has dismissed a lawsuit by residents of a suburban New York City county who accused the World Health Organization of gross negligence in responding to the coronavirus pandemic. U.S. District Judge Kathy Siebel said yesterday, Monday, the WHO was immune under its own 1948 Constitution and the International Organization Immunities Act from the proposed class action lawsuit by the 7 Westchester County plaintiffs. The plaintiffs, including a New Rochelle doctor and 6 Mount Vernon residents who contracted COVID-19, sought damages for Westchester adults over the WHO's alleged downplaying of the coronavirus early in the outbreak and failure to quickly declare a pandemic and coordinate a global response. But the judge said the WHO's pandemic response involved policy judgments within its discretion and rejected arguments that alleged negligence voided its immunity. Siebel said the complaint makes only the general and vague assertion that the WHO negligently failed to provide effective leadership and implementation of its core global functions under the international health regulations. Lawyers for the plaintiffs did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte coère. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.